Long of Long Thermochemical. And I had the pleasure of talking to Michael a little bit last night, and so good to see you here, buddy. So.
I guess we'll just work with it where it's at. All right, everyone. Michael Long here with Long Thermochemical. Glad to be here. Thank you for the introduction. And great presentation. I need those slides. Did you find it?
Yeah.
Someone's going to have to help me. I'm an engineer. I don't know how to do this. I can go down. Did we replace this? I swear it was tall for others. All right, well. Okay, today I would like to talk with you all about some observations that we've made in our roughly 10 years in the thermochemical and bioresource space. There we are. Quick background. Long Thermochemical is a real-world, boots-on-the-ground engineering consultancy with project implementation experience. We have global collaborations and have provided services to public and private sector entities. Really, our key hands-on experience comes from around 15 years. I was there 10 years, some of my colleagues 15, of a woody biomass gasification facility that we were doing all the integral work on developing technologies and really proving them out, not just paper studies. We have played with and developed systems for renewable natural gas, hydrogen, SAF, diesel, alcohols, power to gas, power to X, whatever it may be, excuse me, and even activated carbon systems. So we like to think that we occupy the space of 1 foot in academia, because that's where we really came from, and 1 foot really on the ground making projects work. I was also the author of the winning proposal for the first ever U.S. woody biomass renewable natural gas to power to gas upgrading pilot demonstration before leaving to start this consultancy. To put it as succinctly as I can, Long Thermochemical was founded to service this growing industry with a consortium of experienced practitioners that are ready to assist in commercialization. That is our focus. I spent enough time winning grants and doing academic research, stayed up way too many nights trying to make things work and realizing we were just going in circles. So now we are independent of that circle and trying to really choose projects that we can help with. We try to provide as-needed services rather than an incredible amount of build hours. But that all depends on how much help you need. Okay, as I introduced, I just want to ramble about a few things today, and I'm hoping that this would be insightful and helpful to all of you in the waste and bioresource space. So this slide, of course, I'm a technical engineer, so there's going to be way too much, and I won't get to all of it. But I want to talk about bioresources. First off, something that I think is finally reaching public awareness. There's not enough biomass. You can do some pretty quick calculations that to conclude we're not going to replace fossil with biomass. So get that out of your head, everyone who's really optimistic. We can supplement quite a lot of fossil resources, but the best studies on total availability of biomass in the US come to about 30 million or 30 quadrillion BTUs per year, and the energy consumption in the US, even just last year, was close to 100. So sure, we can supplement a lot. This is also why sustainable aviation fuel is taking off, because you're not going to be able to replace that with electricity anytime soon. But let's be realistic about how much biomass there is. Second, biomass is distributed in nature. What I mean by this is, unlike fossil resources or various other projects, the nature of how biomass grows naturally is that it doesn't all concentrate in one spot. And even for those of you with the waste, landfills, anaerobic digestion, waste resources where the biomass is concentrating to some point, it's still nothing compared to what fossil resource concentrations are. This results in a fundamental limitation on the size of your projects. I'm not so sure how successful some of these mega projects will be, is what I'm saying, because they're going to run into resource limitations over time. Trends. All right. It's quite exciting to see in the last maybe 4 years the stigma against plastics, non-biogenic recyclables, is slowly dying out. I attribute this mostly to, well, realities on the ground. China banned import of our waste in 2018, and wow, wouldn't you know, now everyone's interested in plastics. I think it's very exciting that the regulators are coming around to this, and it's no longer a problem because plastics are great for recyclability. They are incredibly useful however you want to reprocess them if they're reprocessed correctly, and they are, I think it was mentioned earlier, really good for the thermochemical systems. Steel on the ground projects that we have seen, really kind of following from the distributed nature of projects concept, very low cost feedstock. I think you can see on this fuzzy chart here, $70 a ton keeps coming up. It's what the researchers like to think is the most that would go into a successful project. That's what you're paying for your feedstock. From what we've seen, that's way too high. The projects that are actually getting on the ground with steel happening, you're actually building something, they're significantly below that. Also, they're, to fit that, small to medium-sized facilities taking advantage of niche opportunities, such as nut crops. Okay, now some shortfalls when you're looking at project development, when you're reviewing due diligence. We've seen a lot of feedstock studies that honestly aren't true. People, they look nice, they spent a lot of work on these studies, but the law of averages comes in and the regionality of the feedstock tends to be overlooked. So quite often something may look great on paper, but an analysis of the demand and competition for that feedstock in the local area of that exact project, typically that's a 50-mile to a 100-mile radius, really comes into play. This goes back again to the distributed nature of biomass. So if you see a feedstock study that's just using a big average for all of California or all of the US, I'm telling you, you need to look a little deeper than that. You're going to run into issues. All this is to say that supply competition does and will occur. A lot of these technologies are new, so you don't see the competition yet, and we find a lot of developers not too concerned about the competition. I'll show you in this next slide why that's an issue. Here's a feedstock area analysis we did for a USDA 9003 for a client of ours late last year. It's a little representative and somewhat redacted because private information, but you can see here you need to focus on all available resources because sure, the client thinks there's plenty of whatever resource they want, but we want to really bracket the potential risk of these projects, so we looked at all available resources in the project area. From there, though you can't read these very well, it's all fuzzy, but you can see there's a breakdown of current and expected forest biomass prices delivered to the site as a function of area demand, because let's be real, there's going to be competition. That's what these other two tables are getting into. There's existing potential competition. Maybe they're not using this feedstock now, but we know the inputs to woody biomass power plants, for example, they're curious and wanting to use whatever low-cost feedstock they can get. They're going to adapt with time. They may become competition for whatever your project may be. This was a nut facility or a nut processing. And really where you're worth your salt if you're a consultant in the industry is what's happening on the in-development projects. Those haven't fully been announced. Some are announced, some aren't. But we can analyze for that as you tend to know what's happening behind the scenes versus what's made public announcements. So you can see in the study I've circled two pieces. That 4.1% is what the client was sure they would consume. So they were sure we're fine. If we build this facility, we're barely using any of the feedstock in the area. Once you apply a regional analysis on that, they were using almost a quarter of all the available feedstock in a reasonable distance to actually pay for the transport of. This is today before every one of those competitors might or might not succeed and start competing with them for feedstock. That's going to jam up the prices. This is all a long-winded way to say, and we hear it everywhere, but I don't understand why people don't take it seriously. You need long-duration supply contracts. I think you said 20 years. I'd argue, and you know the financing better, but figure out where your full return is. Maybe you can get that return in 10 years because your technology's that good. Make an argument for that. But you need a contract till that's fully paid off, and then you can all break even and at least not lose money. But maybe there's a discussion on whether that's actually financeable. Okay, let's keep this moving. Next topic, bioresource valorization. So my big whole picture of what I wanted to do today was give you all a very detailed walkthrough of how there's a lot more nuance to the pathways. We keep hearing things like alcohol to jet or woody biomass to RNG, and I understand those who aren't deep in this see that as a straight path. But in reality, all of this is a revamping of mostly supplemented old fossil technology, and every one of these products and intermediates interchange in different ways depending on where your process goes. So sure, it's easy to comprehend when we go, hey, here's a simple pathway, but our view is to more holistically look at the potential of a bioresource for a project. So we like to really look at the full potential of pathways to see if there might be a lower hanging fruit or better return on a project through a less considered pathway. An example of this, well, there's my messy slide that did never quite get there, but you can see a lot of overlap, and you could say this goes back to what Scott and Mike Hart were pointing out. They were showing a lot of details of how syngas chemistry can go to various products that we know of, or even methanol opens the door. What I try to do here is show that even way over in the alcohol space, in the sugar space, this is what alcohol to jet is. That's an old tech that's now being revitalized. You're going from your ethanol now into the hydrocarbon syngas pathways, and there's a lot of mess and overlap here. All this is to say there's a lot of potential future pathways and future niche that we can find. Project developers probably don't have to worry about that, but I think it's important to at least know that it's not as simple as all I need to know is which of these generally pushed 10 pathways do I pick. There's a lot more potential there. Here's an example for a large institutional client that had a anaerobic digestion system and a fleet. So here, because they have a fleet, they can get into transportation credits. So first we were able to map out for them. That didn't plot right either way. Your typical anaerobic digestion, this would be receiving organics waste. You have your digester, and then you have, well, mostly people would consider what? You flare it, you sell the biogas, excuse me, upgrade it as RNG, you make electricity. Well, you can also go through steam methane reforming to all the syngas pathways. And as these markets develop, it's important to pay attention to that because there are movements in ammonia, in methanol, in Fischer-Tropsch for SAF. So some of these biogas plants that have never had to consider whether you just do a genset, or all they've had to consider is whether you do a genset or just RNG upgrading, now there's a lot more options. In this analysis, we looked at, I think, 13 different backends, worked with a lot of our technology providers who are working for downsizing these old technologies to actually be of appropriate size and applicability to these bioresource projects. And we were able to put together a pretty detailed and I believe quite real world, not some high-level academic investment study, looking at really what the cost and return, your CapEx, your OpEx, and we were plotting that all out as internal rate of return on a sensitivity analysis because we don't know the future on some of these inputs that went into this study. This was a lot of work, but just a note, if you can read some of these numbers, sure, these returns look really good, but that's because this client was with an existing digester and simply flaring. So obviously we're not paying for hardly any of the capital that's already there, we're just paying for these improvements. But there's an example of where you can really see some interesting returns and you can get some very valuable information on what the best moves into the future are. All of this in the end really comes down to the financing people and the incentives. The incentives are worth more in general than the product itself. So it's all about how you get that value stack. All right, now for the rest of my time, I'm just going to go through a bunch of different bioresource products that you can get to. Not really go into how you get there, because there's many pathways, but really what we're seeing happen in this space, and hopefully to just make you all a little more aware of some of the up-and-coming different resources that you might not have heard too much about. So first off, RNG, that's particularly dear to me, as I've spent my whole dissertation really focused on that more than anything. What's happening in the bigger picture of RNG? First off, natural gas isn't going anywhere. Most all the infrastructure throughout the world runs on natural gas. So if we can make fake natural gas that runs the same, renewable natural gas, that's a no-brainer. But the problem is natural gas is cheap. Some quick numbers, natural gas tends to go for $3 to $4 a unit. Renewable natural gas is typically modeled at and generally accepted to cost $7 to $20 a unit. What woody biomass-based renewable natural gas would cost has been modeled by myself, my colleagues, and most of the leading institutions throughout the world to be in the range of $12 to $45 in MMBTU. Where I'm going with this is the contracts I've seen are way beyond this, way higher. What the public utilities are paying, we can't get into exactly what those numbers are, but they're high. So there's actually a lot of potential if you can get to a public utility that wants to pay for this. Now, what's happening with natural gas? The majority right now is sold throughout the country to California. And this is because of SB 1440 that mandated 5% renewables in the natural gas grid by 2025. I don't know if you guys have checked your calendar in a while. We're not going to make it. By 2030, 12.5% renewables. Some very quick algebra and a little bit of knowledge of all the potential resources in California that are not woody biomass tells us that, let's just say, we exploit all non-woody biomass resources and we get all the biomass we can. This is some University of California, Davis data. Even with all of that exploited tomorrow, we would still fail the 2025 deadline by about 4 facilities of the 100 megawatt thermal scale. Those are each going to cost about $100 to $400 million and take about 2 to 5 years to build. Continuing that math, pretty simple, you're going to need 69 facilities by 2030 to even meet that deadline. So natural gas is cheap. It's a bad move because RNG costs way more than natural gas, but it's a great move because California cannot and will not ever get enough of it. To add to that, there are proposed changes. I believe it's CARB. I think they regulate the book and claim. It's not official yet, but we need to watch for this because this will drive this factor even harder. They're proposing that book and claim no longer be allowed. Instead, it's an adjustment on that where you have to physically demonstrate delivery of that or potential delivery of that natural gas to California. What this will mean is all those digester facilities that are currently making a lot of carbon credit money selling in California, I guess they might be grandfathered in. I'm not sure how that would work, but anything new won't be able to import to California unless there's a physical pipeline. Implications of that is you cannot make a good enough play for RNG right now if you can make the numbers work. I think it was mentioned by Scott that Frontline is going hard on RNG. This is why. Oh yeah, I'm taking too long. Okay, so ammonia, up and coming. Ammonia can take advantage of hydrogen incentives, but there's not a lot of direct ammonia incentives at the moment. So ammonia just piggybacks off hydrogen, which makes sense because it's made out of hydrogen. What's really happening? Well, if you look at the fleet order indexes around the world, there's big movement on ammonia-fueled vessels for the near future. The play that's happening is that decarbonization of marine shipping will eventually work its way to ammonia after working its way through methanol. There are a lot of these would be large-scale projects for mostly e-fuel ammonia. And usually I'm a little more skeptical of e-fuel, but I think these are going to go through because a lot of them are add-ons to existing ammonia plants. So we see a strong play for continued growth of ammonia production and a huge growth in ammonia demand due to this emerging market of fuel for ships that are currently being built. Renewable LPG and DME. This is known as propane. DME is made from methanol, but it's recently been approved for blending in propane to lower the carbon intensity of propane. Mass amounts of DME are going to be made in the near future, we believe, and LPG is really just a co-product of all the HVO, this would be all the lipids, coconut oil, and all the processing that's currently making most of the renewable diesel throughout the world. So there's not really facilities for LPG except one in the Imperial Valley that's actually doing DME to LPG. But other than that, most of it's just co-product. So this one's interesting to watch, but you probably wouldn't make your own facility just for LPG. It's more of a valuable co-product. Hydrogen, okay, yep, everyone's talking about hydrogen. There's pipeline studies underway in California. This will hugely improve the economics of transport, which is most of your cost of hydrogen in California at least. I like to say, or is thinking, hydrogen right now, at least fueling distributed infrastructure, it's a case study in when subsidized optimism meets reality. Everyone quotes, publishes, and constantly repeats that hydrogen currently costs $2 to $4 a kilogram, and that renewable hydrogen costs $5 to $10 a kilogram. This has been modeled, it's been published. I could Google right now, and every paper is going to tell you this. They're all wrong. Maybe in the Gulf Coast, they're right. Maybe in an academic study, they're right. But that's wrong in California, and I care about what's happening in the real world for my projects. I want these to be successes. Real quotes for Northern California, I've got those quotes, range between $10 and $42 a kilogram delivered. You want to go to any hydrogen fueling station. There's 64 of them in California. The average last year was $32 a kilogram, almost 33. Now, of course, there's some markup because that's distributed infrastructure. Fueling stations were constantly breaking down, and there are lines, or at least particularly in 2023 and 2024, lines to even get to your stations. This is to say, Unfortunately, this was a over rollout of hydrogen before the technology and the commercialization was really ready. It was over subsidized and moved too fast before it was good, and now I think there's going to be at least a pulling back on distributed hydrogen. But the future's still bright. Hydrogen is a great fuel and a great intermediate chemical. I believe you'll see a lot of fleet fueling applications because the incentives look like they'll remain strong, and in fleet fueling you can really control the use of that fueling infrastructure to maximize capacity and use. It's the same as I think we were talking about downtime on your system. These distributed fueling systems have way too much downtime because it's waiting on the general public. Heavy incentivization remains, but it's somewhat unclear, and I know if I've read history well enough. We already did methanol, we already did hydrogen, we're back to hydrogen again. I hope this isn't just fuel of the year syndrome. We're off to a bad start, but there is potential for hydrogen, so I hope we can pull through. E-fuels. Quick rant. I know this doesn't have to do much with bioresources, but I figured if I'm on this topic, let's dab into e-fuels. Is this a elegant solution, or is this a superficial fad? It's a great story. We're going to use electricity. We're going to make all the fuels. It's going to solve all the problems of hydrogen. I mean, hydrogen has a lot of potential, but it's not very dense. Well, really, in our view, the whole drive to e-fuels is because there was, once again, an over-subsidization of intermittent renewables. So now we can do e-fuels, a very thermodynamically inefficient path, and I would say a poor use of electricity, to correct imbalances that were made by over-deployment of solar and wind. It's kind of an elegant solution, but is it really where we should have the system? I'm not sure. We'll see where this goes. The cost challenges, they're significant. There's been major investment in the last few years, but also major slowing recently. I think 19 projects have already canceled since 2024. Steel has been put in the ground, which is exciting, but almost, I think all of these were at geothermal or hydropower, and those are not intermittent, so you're not actually solving the whole problem that we're claiming we're trying to solve with e-fuels. You're just inefficiently making a magic fuel. What's the future? Well, it's really unsure. If electricity costs soar, there's not really a path because it's based off electricity. If electricity costs crash, well, now you're going to have competition with direct electrification. I think there's a potential future. Pay attention for coupling to nuclear. That's going to go with that low-cost energy. We're having the data center rollout. Potential for islanded, but I think right now it's more of a fad. But I'll be happy to be wrong if that changes. All right, let's speed this up a little because here I am again. Yep, over-rambling. Methanol is a huge gateway chemical to really biochemicals production rather than biofuels. This was already, I think, pointed out in Hart's slide, and methanol production is continuously growing. So methanol is a good chemical to watch. There's been 123 orders for methanol-fueled vessels. Again, this is shipping, working its way towards decarbonization. And there will be increasing deployment of methanol to gasoline, methanol to olefins, that's how you get your diesels and SAF from methanol, as well as, we believe, some DME facilities, because I do think DME is going to keep rolling out, even though it's a very alternative fuel. I think because of that merger or blending into the LPG fraction, it gives governments and entities a way to decarbonize on a massive scale by just decarbonizing through a blending of DME in their existing LPG streams. Ethanol, we don't need to talk too much about ethanol. It's pretty stable, but the big player for ethanol right now is the new pathway, alcohol to jet. This is actually a revamp of an old pathway, but now it's being pushed real heavily. The connection of syngas fermentation, the LanzaTech concept, and ethanol to jet pathway really lets you increase the market potential for use of ethanol, because right now it's blend limited. There's only so much gasoline you can blend into. So if you can make higher value chemicals or fuels, getting into SAF, jet fuel, there's a lot of potential there, but I haven't seen steel on the ground yet. Someone will have to correct me if I'm wrong. There's also increasing use in ethers in Europe. It's a small fraction of their use, but I think that'll keep growing. Lipids-based fuels going through the roof. This is really how we're getting practically all of our renewable diesel right now and all of our SAF. So that should keep going. Major imports of used cooking oil coming in from China. The amount of available feedstock coming from China is always suspect, so at some point that's going to reach a peak, but right now it's going through the roof. Sustainable aviation fuel, well, there's been a lot of project development activity. There's not been a lot of steel on the ground. A lot of it's still in the early phases and keeps getting delayed. I think this is because of the rush of a few years ago, particularly with all the additional incentive funding going on, where a lot of projects that really weren't as ready as they could have been, a lot of excitement on Wall Street was happening because of the potential to make money. Things moved faster than they were ready, and now it's somewhat correcting itself. Hopefully some of these can come through. Production numbers in 2023 were 500,000, 2024, 1 million tons. That was 30% short of the projections, and we are projected to hit 2.1 million tons by the end of the year. Expect a shortfall there. I think will be significantly short. We already mentioned the growth is rapid through HEFA. That's mostly doing renewable diesel, but that also can easily make without, I don't even think you have to modify the facility. It's more just what fraction you take to get some jet. But it's just, the play isn't moving fast enough yet for what people were hoping. Alcohol to jet will push that through when we start to see those moving forward. There's a lot of pathways to jet, but only a few are really producing right now. Pyrolysis oils, we're seeing commercial successes in use as a heating oil. Some limited applications, which I think have a lot of potential, is a precursor to wood chemicals. And then there's a lot of activity in refinery blend stocks. So now this would be taking your pyrolysis oil, upgrading a little so it's a better input to go into existing refinery infrastructure, and then it just plugs right in to decarbonize existing billions and billions of dollars of refinery fossil infrastructure. Trends are really, well, there's going to be continued growth as refinery blend stocks and wood chemical feedstocks. Hub and spoke concepts work really well here because pyrolysis facilities are much simpler than your gasification facilities. And the eventual big future for marine, which I think makes great sense for pyrolysis oils, but I think we're years away, is direct use in the large heavy combustion marine engines, because those are similar to heavy industry and they can really handle that stuff. But no one wants to risk the cost of one of those vessels right now on testing that. And I think this is my final slide. What about carbonization? And this is biochar. I think Dr. Neal did a good job getting into some of the carbon markets here. We typically work with a partner, Offstring. What we're seeing, these are probably the most deployed that we've seen in the last few years. A lot of small biochar projects that are taking advantage of the voluntary carbon market. We're also seeing, and I think it's a good move to get out of the riskiness or uncertainty of voluntary carbon markets. There's some advanced carbon moves where you can take that biochar, add a little more processing, and get to various high-value carbons, whether it's carbon black, whether it's activated carbon. We can use the PFAS word that everyone's using these days, a lot of carbons for that. Even advanced gas storage and, well, gas storage and some other stuff. Sorry, I blanked on that. Anyways, I hope I didn't run over too much, but once again, Michael Long, Thermochemical. We try to be experts who know what's happening, but are also on the ground, ready to help as needed, where needed. Thank you.
Well, I thought I was